you will have the chance to do that. So, um, with a show of hands, you can raise a hand if you know how to do that. Can everybody hear me well? Or you can type it in the chat if you want. Okay, wonderful. So let's dive into this. I'm learning all kinds of cool things. I can now use my clicker. And this is the third in a series of, we're going to go six with this, talking about the history of witchcraft and magic. Um, so I'm going to do this really brief because I know most of you know me, but just to give you a little background of where all this comes from. I grew up in the live entertainment industry. The show called Austin City Limits, believe it or not. Went through high school, graduated, even though they tried to kick me out. Went in the Marine Corps. That's where I calmed down. I got most of my formal education. Um, they taught me how to, follow orders and do the right thing. When I got out of the Marine Corps, I went to work for a little company called Merrill Lynch. You may have heard of them. Yeah. And believe it or not, from Marine to stockbroker. And I was privileged enough to work with entertainment industry stocks. Grand Ole Opry, we got to take them public. Starter Sports, which is a sports memorabilia company, we got to take them public. And while I was in Corpus Christi with Merrill Lynch, I was still doing live music things. So I was privileged enough to do some live sound things for Selena Quintanilla back then. Then 2004, which is going on 16 years ago, I came to Full Sail University, where I'm a course director, and I currently teach in the music business program. I teach concert management and touring. Believe it or not, I was Full Sail's first accounting teacher. Um, as you know, right now we are making new ways. WPRK is a local college radio station, which many of you heard us from the first time. We do Pagan Sunrise on Fridays and Biscuits, Bacon, and Blues uh, on Sundays, along with the Age of Aquarius. Well, right now, Rollins College, which sponsors WPRK, is kind of taking a break, trying to figure out what to do. So we are no longer in the terrestrial on FM, but 2 weeks ago, we got together and said, hey, we got to keep doing this. And now we are podcasting Pagan Sunrise, which is really cool. So we're still putting it out, we're recording it. And it also makes it possible, because the way we're doing it through Zoom is that if you ever wanted to join us live in the studio, we could do that. And you know that me and Jess, as the Bard and the Witch, we go out and do a lot of things in our local community, charity events. People ask me what my path is sometimes, so I try to, I hate to put labels on anything, but I say probably Zen Druidry is probably the best way that you could describe what the spiritual path that I follow. And forgive my spelling because I spell it the English way, but I follow the Tuatha De Danann, and I have a little, a little Irish in me sometimes. So that's where we go from there. This is not really relevant to this because I can turn you up, but when I'm in the classroom, I always show this slide, and it says, I have one thing in common with the Prince of Darkness, Ozzy Osbourne. I've been doing this for about 20 something years, maybe 30 something years. And a lot of it's because of the live sound. So right now I look like that. I have about $5,000 worth of a hearing enhancement in right now. So when I turn the mics back on, I'll be able to hear you. So if I ask you to repeat yourself or whatever, it's not you, it's me, and I'm tuning in the hearing aids. I always try to start every class with this analogy. Um, um, hold on. And it kind of puts things in perspective. And that I'm going to give you all my references at the end of the class, and you can look at them again. But sometimes things are subjective. So I never want to come out and say I have the only answer. So This is a little slide that kind of puts that together. At the end, not a trick question. Tell me, what comes next? Anybody? No? Nobody? 9, right? Okay. Everybody was afraid to answer because it's a trick question. But if you're a math major, you also could have said 11. Because what if the question would have been, give me prime numbers, versus the question, give me odd numbers or count by twos. So my point is, sometimes there's more than one right answer. So I'm going to give you the research and everything according to Jerry. But if somebody disagrees with me or you see conflicting information, I never want to say I'm right and you're wrong. I just want to say sometimes there's different points of view. So the previous classes were really quick. I know some of you have been in all the classes. Magic in the Ancient World. That was our first class. And then we talked about, last week, medieval magic. In the ancient world, how do we define that? We define that as Mesopotamia, Egypt, the Hebrew nation, or Israel, and we also looked at the Greek and Roman gods and how they define magic. So we took that BC, if you will, or BCE, and looked at what was happening in Mesopotamia, what was happening in Egypt along the Nile River, up into the Hebrew nation, if you will. We looked at the Hebrew nation or the Jewish nation. And one thing that was unique about them was they were monotheistic, and all of the cultures around them weren't. Then we looked at Greece and how they were brought together and taken over by Rome. So, and to the height of power in Rome, this is 106 BCE. By the way, just the way we count dates, so we take that guy Jesus out of it, is if you see 106 BCE, that's equivalent to BC. And if you see or any date, CE, that stands for Common Era, that's equivalent to what other people call AD. All right, so let's dive into this. We are supposed to be. Forgive me, a little technical difficulty, we'll get it. We're supposed to be looking at the Demonologist. Okay. Let's share screen. There we go. The Demonologist. All right. So we had talked about types of magic. There was natural magic. There was image magic. And then as Christianization happened, there became angel magic. And this wasn't angel magic that necessarily happened through the Bible, if you will, or through the priest, or through, it was things that happened outside of it where people were making connections with angels. They were also making connections with demons. So we saw this as Christianization came out and that the church was introduced and that the Bible was introduced, that people were still going to find their own ways to have magic. Now, was magic religion, science, or a little of both? And did you have to have a spiritual walk to perform magic? Or were we calling magic simply things that we did not understand, especially yet in science? Sometimes it was called a peculiar discourse of religion and science, how they blended together. But basically, when we look at magic, it can be a culmination of religion, science, spirituality. Pliny the Elder talked about the salamander and the honey, and that was a spiritual thing, but we also know now that what happened with that was scientific. We know that chants now, the sound vibrations can be a very medical healing thing. But did those chants also have some magic involved because of the intent? And Helen Blavatsky, right, Russian, very much says, and I think she sums it up. The chief difficulty which prevents scientific people or men of science from believing in the divine as well as in nature is their materialism. So we are defining magic in this course as realistic ways of dealing with situations by obtaining access to sacred powers that compel assistance from non-human entities. So whatever your path, I think that covers it. It's entirely rational, not superstitious. So the demonologist, and I will define them, that we're going to cover today, and the things, the impact that they had on magic, were the people who were well-known authors. They had access or privilege to the kings and the queens and the people in power to say, this is what is happening in our culture. This is what is happening, and this is how we need to maintain control. Because we all know now that a big part of Christianization was not just about the religion, it was about political control. So here's 4 figures that came out and wrote some theories, put some orders in place as we went into the Inquisition. And you will see how those things rose to a peak and how, as we exit the lesson, they started to subside slightly and the thought became a little different. But in the beginning, the thought was pretty much paranoia, I think, and lack of control. So these gentlemen helped say, yes, you need to do this. Yes, this is how we can bring these crazy people under control. So we're going to kind of take it from a historical perspective, talk about the Inquisitions, because this is what was going on, and how was all this happening? How all of a sudden did everybody start becoming evil and subject to all kinds of trials? There were 700 years of Inquisition. Basically, this is a rough estimate, but this is when it started. So once we got into the Common Era and the Christianity spread, or it was starting to spread, and it created, because there was resistance. No one really knows, but during these 700 years, there's a lot of things that were not documented. But the estimates, this is a wide range, I get it, but the estimates are from 30 to 300,000 people were brought to trial and lost their lives by however means: drowning, burning at the stake, hanging, beheading, torture. So this is very serious. In Spain, these inquisitions started right before 1500. And again, a lot of the times was we're bringing you to trial, and you need to confess. And we're going to torture you till you confess. And if you do confess, then you're guilty. In Portugal, very similar. Excuse me, started a little later, 1536. In Rome, 1542. And in Peru, across the pond, 1570. So these are all countries where we see a lot of trials, a lot of reaching out to, in terror, to the local populace because they would not accept Christianity or the new customs and ways. And that's where we have the demonologist. So let's start with the first one. There he is. And lived a good 66 years. That was a good life in the 1500s. But he was one of the demon maniae. So he looked at the demons, obviously that they were opposite of the angels. So we have these angels that are mentioned in the Bible. So if there's angels, they mention demons. So you have to fear the demons because the demons have as much power as the angels. So if anything is anti-angel, it's pro-demon. And that was the logic that he was trying to put into it. And when it applied to witchcraft, he said that the witchcraft basically was a pact with the demons, because that's how their power, it didn't come from God, it didn't come from the angels, so they had to have a pact with the demons to exist. Now, there was, you and I know, there was the old ways, witchcraft, whatever you want to call it, before the Bible created demons. However, in this case, that was his logic, and that was what he was pushing for. So his agenda was that anything that was witchcraft, anything that wasn't associated with the Bible, was a pact with a demon. And the trials, basically, like we discussed last week, were totally against the safeguards of justice. All you had to do was accuse somebody. And we'll talk about how light the accusation could be and what it would take to find somebody guilty. And many times, even those who were on trial and who had a very strong will refused to admit to this, and whether they were innocent, probably innocent, and they still died because they were tortured to death. William Perkins, Mr. Perkins, he was over on the English side, yes, and had counsel with Queen Elizabeth I, the first Queen Elizabeth. Maybe I should say it that way. Queen Elizabeth #1, okay? And his goal was, we need to eliminate the damned art of witchcraft. And he had counsel with the Queen, and he said, this is against the church. All these things that happened outside of the Bible and outside of the church and outside of the priest need to be eliminated by whatever means. So very active in starting that, in the British Isles, if you will. And over in France, basically they just decided to have a witch hunt. And that because Satan has sex with women on the Sabbaths. So that was here we have Sabbath, and that's what Satan is doing. So we got to hunt these people down because they are witches. And most of them are married because that's what Satan prefers. So, so it's a sin of quote unquote adultery, and that this is what's happening. So there needs to be an actual witch hunt to find these women that are. So again, now where we see the connotation falls on the female gender, and so that, as we see, is going to become more prevalent. And then Martin Del Rio, he began the magical investigations just about right before the 16th century. And he's the one who came up with the idea of burning at the stake. Or that maybe not the first one, but this is okay. And he took it out of the cities into the countryside, if you will. And they said, sometimes things were in the cities and where the churches were, there were certain things that they wanted to control and practice. But now his idea is you need to take this out into the quote unquote, highways and byways, and we need to burn all these people, burn them at the stake. And we're going to have these investigations, if you will. Well, luckily, Reginald Scott, luckily or not luckily, but Reginald Scott came along. And although he wasn't pro anything, he basically talked about the discovery of witchcraft. And he said, witchcraft really doesn't exist. These people don't have any supernatural or spiritual powers. They can't connect with nature. So why are we even worried about it? There's no credit. He tried to denounce the credibility of the witchcraft and the go-aways. But in doing that, he said, why are we going to trial with everything? Why are we doing all this? Let them be. They have no power. And so you start to see a decline in the thinking and the Inquisitions. And by now, probably all the land grabs have been done by the kings and queens and everything confiscated. You killed a few thousand people. But it was a time of turning, and that